I just arrived home from getting tested for a deadly disease that is plaguing the country, and I'm now going to talk about world's biggest company's plans to create a 3D virtual reality universe for everyone to join. I know that sounds like the first line of a young adult dystopian story, but it is not. Mark Zuckerberg has officially entered his dystopian sci-fi villain era with the Metaverse, and I want to make a silly, goofy video about it to distract myself from the existential dread that I'm feeling right now. In case you're unaware, Facebook, our favorite boomer platform that has been under fire regularly for promoting hate speech and misinformation, is rebranding as the Metaverse, Meta for short.
I am proud to announce that starting today, our company is now Meta. Our mission remains the same.
Why does he pause like that? It's just, the pause is what really just gets me every time. Ugh.
Everything we do online today, connecting socially, entertainment, games, work, is going to be more natural and vivid.
I've read enough dystopian sci-fi books in my lifetime to kind of get the heebie-jeebies from this. I did not read The Hunger Games at age 15 for me to not see smoke. And because I only have 2 brain cells left that are doing anything for me right now, I'm gonna try to make sense of reality by comparing it to fiction that is already trying to represent that reality. Strap in, kids, we are entering hyperreality. And hyperreality is also exactly what the Metaverse is probably going to give us.
All right, perfect.
Boy.
Oh, hey, Mark. Hey, what's going on?
Hi, Mark. What's up, Mark?
This place is amazing.
This looks like it was made up. And Zuck has also mentioned that he imagines people entering the Metaverse through like virtual reality glasses. So not just like on a screen, but really virtual reality, being in a completely different dimension. I can just imagine science fiction writers and screenwriters coming up with their science fiction stories, making up these futuristic technologies and thinking, yes, this is going to be like a commentary, a critique of the dangers of possible technologies, and then some tech bro reads it and is like, actually, that sounds kind of dope. I'm gonna actually make this. You know, when Oscar Wilde said life imitates art far more than art imitates life, I don't think he was prepared for this. Now, of course, I'm just a rando on the internet. The fact that this is kind of making me uncomfortable doesn't really say much, but you know, let's just listen to what the experts have to say on the Metaverse. So Lenier, presently a researcher at Microsoft, says, if you run the Metaverse on a business model that's similar to the one that Facebook runs on, it'll destroy humanity. Here's what Jeremy Balanson, the founding director of Stanford's Virtual Human Interaction Lab, describes as his 30-minute rule. That is the maximum amount of time he thinks someone should spend within virtual reality. But half an hour won't be enough for Facebook. So to recap, the Metaverse is supposedly, like in the eyes of Mark Zuckerberg, going to be this 3D virtual world where people can just like spend their daily lives, go to meetings, go to work, have fun, play games. I don't know, I just really don't think a company like Facebook needs to have a bigger chokehold on our life that it already has, especially considering all the scandals, you know? You cannot convince me that this doesn't sound like some kind of dystopian sci-fi story, so I thought, you know, let's put our words to actions and actually compare some famous dystopian novels that were trying to warn us about the future to the future, which is today. Let's start with a classic, and also my favorite dystopian, Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. This one takes place in a future utopia where everything is hierarchical. From the moment that you are born, you are kind of made to exist in a certain class, and that class decides like what jobs you are going to do. But also it's a huge exploration of extreme hedonism. Everything in this world is just about getting your dopamine hit, stimulation, fun, having a good time. It's a world of mass production, predictability, overconsumption. Sounds familiar? And the antagonist in this story, the villain, is the Ford company, which controls everything basically. It owns everything and it regulates everything. And one of the things that I found to be very interesting in this book, that it kind of creates this idea that the Ford company is the one that is kind of perpetuating this idea of keeping everyone extremely happy all the time. Everyone in this book is on drugs and on antidepressants, and if you say something in conversation that is even remotely not super positive, it'll be very frowned upon. You know, it's like, hey, are you having a thought in your brain? That doesn't sound very fun. Here, have some more happy pills. It's better to just be positive all the time and always distract yourself with entertainment. And it's slowly revealed throughout the book that it is kind of the goal of the Ford company, because happy people will keep consuming their goods, and also they won't think. They won't have a critical thought in their mind because that's not happy, and then they also probably won't question the status quo. I'm just saying that I think that's interesting. I don't want to be like a conspiracy theorist here. I don't think anyone is like trying to keep us dumb with their entertainment. But I do think it's good to, I don't know, I guess like be aware that if everything becomes entertainment, it's easy to never stand still and like think about what's going on because everything seems so fun on the surface. Like Facebook, you know, seems very fun on the surface until you find out like all these scandals and all like the hate speech that's being promoted there, radicalization, etc. Same thing on YouTube, by the way. Just saying, if we're gonna spend our lives in a 3D virtual reality where we can play 3D surfing games and have fun all the time, we should also stop to think whether it's a good thing. So how do I think the metaverse will compare to the Ford company in Brave New World? Only time will tell, but I think this book is gonna stay relevant. And then we have the father of all dystopians, the most important one. No, not that one. The Hunger Games, of course. The Hunger Games, of course, is the futuristic world with a strong class divide, and also every year there's the Hunger Games where people of like the working areas have to fight each other till death to kind of keep them subdued, to keep them from revolting against the elite class. And we have our villain, President Snow, who is very charming, very old, and very creepy. I don't really think he competes with the awkward alien person that is Mark Zuckerberg. I once saw a comment that described Mark Zuckerberg as a text-to-speech system come to life, and I think that's very accurate. And I know that the metaverse is supposed to be kind of just like this cool, fun space to hang out and work. So I'll give them the benefit of the doubt, and I don't think they're gonna hold like a Hunger Games in the metaverse. Although, oh my god, I just realized it is fake. And you can see how people are taking Squid Game. I'm just thinking about what people have done to Squid Game, which, you know, in the series is like a horrible game of life and death that is a representation that the power of people with money hold over people in debt, and it's like very macabre, and people are just like turning it into, in real life, actually turning it into like an actual game you can play, just without the death. Actually, you know, I think I'm gonna change my mind and I say I wouldn't put it past anyone for organizing a Hunger Games that you can play with your own 3D avatar in the metaverse. But I don't think that that's gonna be Mark Zuckerberg himself. It's gonna be more like developers that are gonna be using the metaverse for things like this. Who knows? Anyway, despite that, I do actually think that Mark Zuckerberg has passed the Hunger Games vibe check, and he's in fact not very similar to President Snow. I think that the thing with a lot of young adult dystopians from the 2010s is that they are more anti-authoritarian in their dystopian stories, which isn't really very reflective of what's happening with like Facebook and like large companies in the metaverse, because you can kind of tell that dystopians, young adult dystopians, tend to not necessarily be a reflection of the society of that time like most classic dystopians are, but they're more so a reflection of the inner workings of teenagers, which is like their audience. You know how like people in puberty become very anti-authoritarian? That's usually what you find in young adult dystopians, which is valid in itself, but I do think that that means that young adult dystopians are not going to contain like the Mark Zuckerbergs of the world. Okay, but now moving on to the mother of all dystopians. 1984 by George Orwell. This one is, however, like a lot of young adult dystopians, very anti-authoritarian. 1984 is the book that coined the term the thought police. You have the party that oversees everything. Big Brother is watching you. You can't say anything that doesn't comply to the rules of the party. You have to behave in a way that the party wants you to behave, and you have to believe whatever the party wants you to believe. I'm sure you've heard of the famous concept of 2 + 2 = 5. If the party in 1984 tells you that 2 + 2 = 5, then you have to agree and say that that's true. This is of course the antithesis to what Mark Zuckerberg wants his metaverse to be, I assume. You know, it's supposed to be completely free for all. You can do whatever you want. You are not bound by a government or an authority telling you what to do. In 1984, the party fabricates what is truth and what is lie. Facebook is not an authority that decides for us what is truth and what is lie. It just pushes up posts that are untrue because they get more clicks and therefore make them more money. But still, you know, 1984 is about Big Brother is watching you. You can't do anything that doesn't comply with what the party wants you to say. Facebook doesn't do this. You can say whatever you want. They don't have to monitor you. Except like all your likes and the things you read and all the things you click on so they can sell it to advertising companies. They're just, you know, in a silly, goofy mood. You know, this video is really a lot more depressing than I wanted it to be. But now let's move on to the more sci-fi, cyberpunk, virtual reality kind of dystopians that are out there that I really think are gonna hit the mark even more. So in the 80s and 90s, when technology was really like booming and computers and the internet, you got like this surge of sci-fi / dystopian stories kind of exploring this idea of futuristic technologies and what the possible dangers of it would be. And it's actually these sci-fi stories where the idea of virtual reality even began. Like the word metaverse actually stems from a 90s sci-fi novel that created and came up with the idea the metaverse, just in a different way than what you would expect, but we'll get to that. So a famous cyberpunk novel is Neuromancer by William Gibson. This is actually the book that coined the idea of cyberspace, of being able to like transform yourself, kind of like upload your mind into a cyber reality and then go back and forth between the real world and the cyber world, which is kind of what the idea of a metaverse and a lot of like other sci-fi stories that have come after that were all inspired by. Now this book is not necessarily a dystopian. I mean, the bad guy in Neuromancer is like a huge company that owns everything, but the other bad guy in Neuromancer is also a virus, so no comparison to our current world. A computer virus, by the way. It's a computer virus. Then there are also some young adult dystopian sci-fi, more cyberpunky novels. For example, you have Warcross, which is cyberpunk. In the futuristic world of Warcross, the virtual reality is just being used to play games, which I think is kind of already similar to what we're already doing. As far as I'm aware, the only way we're currently using virtual reality is to play games on like your PlayStation. So the villain in Warcross, so they wear these lenses. So instead of having these virtual reality helmets, they wear lenses that link you to the virtual reality, and the villain in Warcross is kind of hacking into these lenses to make everyone do whatever he wants them to do and kind of like turn them into zombies that do to his bidding. Now that is some top tier villain stuff that I don't think any of our real world supervillains can compare to. At least, like, not yet. But the interesting thing is the first book that I thought of when I heard of like Facebook rebranding as the metaverse and what they were going to do with is I thought of this other young adult dystopian novel called Under the Never Sky. I will admit that I haven't read this book, but I just remember a long time ago when this was popular, a friend of mine read it and she described it to me as, if I remember correctly, this world where people also have like virtual reality and like put on glasses or something to like go into virtual reality and like live parts of their life there. And they have to do this because their current world has become completely unlivable because of climate change. So, you know, I think Mark's just thinking ahead with his metaverse. I think he just saw Jeff Bezos going into space, and he saw all these billionaires, you know, like trying to get to space, trying to escape to Mars to get away from a dying world. And he was like, you know, I know a better space to escape to. Cyberspace. How nice of him for creating something for us where we can go when half of the world is underwater. And the last book that I want to talk about is the book that created the word Metaverse. The word Metaverse has been used for a longer time to refer to anything that is like a universe digitally. There used to be this game called, I think, Second Life, that was also described as having a metaverse where you could create your own avatar and live in this other world, exactly like in the video about the metaverse for Facebook. But the original word comes from a sci-fi novel called Snow Crash. And the worst thing about this is that in this novel, the metaverse that appears in this book is not at all portrayed as like a good or positive thing that we should be having. Now, I will admit that I haven't read the book. I really want to, but the reason I'm bringing this up is because I saw a TikTok about it. I know I'm getting my information from very reputable sources as well. I know that I'm part of the problem here, but anyway, I saw a TikTok of someone who did read Snow Crash and kind of like explained how the metaverse in Snow Crash exists and kind of like the dangers that it's trying to portray. So I thought it would be interesting to share this TikTok.
And they're calling their new virtual reality system Metaverse. And I think it's really interesting that they picked that specific name to call their virtual reality sort of universe that they're trying to create, because the term metaverse comes from a novel by Neil Stephenson, a science fiction novel called Snow Crash. Now, a few people have mentioned that this is the book that the term comes from, but a lot of people haven't actually read the book and don't know the connotations of it. I have, though. I think it's a great book, and it's a cyberpunk novel that describes a dystopic future where instead of America having all kinds of advancement in like flying cars and fancy holograms and other stuff that's like more typical of cyberpunk fiction like Blade Runner or stuff, it basically describes an America where every single inch of land looks like this. Just concrete and like advertising, a corporate hellscape. Now, in the fiction of Snow Crash, in order to escape this, capitalist hellscape that these people live in, a ton of people will go into the metaverse, which is sort of exactly what Mark Zuckerberg is describing for his vision, where you would goggle in and then you would enter this virtual world. You choose an avatar for yourself, and then your avatar's actions mimic your actions, that kind of thing. But the thing about the metaverse in Snow Crash is that it very quickly developed the same class hierarchy that existed in the real world, where if you didn't have the money or the influence or just be getting in early enough in the system to like be recognized and take hold of all of the things that made being in the metaverse enjoyable, you were at the bottom of the barrel again and susceptible to all of the whims of your corporate overlords, just like in the real world. And I don't know, I think like naming your, virtual world that you're trying to pitch to people after the specifically flawed, capitalist emphasized virtual world, I don't know. It just seems a little silly to me.
Please check out this creator. I really liked this TikTok. So, I don't know, a company that's full of advertisement where your social class is completely determined by the social capital that you have acquired in this virtual space. Sounds a little familiar and not something that I would like to bring even more into my daily life. I know it's a bit like reductive to just compare this real world thing to just something that exists in fiction, and I don't want to like minimize it through that. But the reasons, like the power of these kind of dystopian books have always been to kind of make us look at the world in a slightly different way through the lens of fiction. So I do think it's fun to kind of revisit older and newer dystopian worlds that are trying to warn us about the future, and then when that future rolls around, to kind of think about like, were they right? Were they not right? Are there things that we need to be critical of when these things start developing? Doesn't have to mean that you have to be completely against them or think it's all gonna go wrong, but it's always good to kind of think of like, what are possible like negative implications of this if we just go along with it because it sounds fun, you know? Anyway, so the very serious and well thought out conclusion to this video is that yes, the metaverse and Mark Zuckerberg are definitely a dystopian sci-fi villain. You know, I can see the potential there. Maybe they're not the typical authoritarian kind of villain antagonist, but I believe that if they really do their best, they can also reach the same amount of privacy violation.